Hello, and welcome to GovTech Viewpoints. My name is Teri Takai, and I'm excited to be here with you for our next conversation. I'm joined by HP's Todd Gustafson for another interesting and fun conversation. Now, each episode of GovTech Viewpoint explores one big question that's facing state and local government decision makers as they're adopting the next generation of technologies. Todd and I are going to be breaking down the latest news and biggest trends and talking about how it impacts state and city and county leaders. Well, Todd, one of the things that certainly has been in the media and in the news is this drive to government efficiency, and how does technology play a role in it? Now, one of the things I will tell you, having been a former government leader in 3 budget challenges, is that in some ways, efficiency isn't new. I think that governments have up and down, in terms of their budgets. And so there are different drives for efficiency, but this one feels a little bit different. It feels like there's some external forces maybe that haven't been there before that are really moving and pushing, doesn't matter whether you're a red, blue, or purple state, toward thinking about efficiencies. So what are some of the things that you're hearing out there, and how do you think about it in terms of how you can work with state and local government around their efficiency agendas?
So probably the single biggest thing that I hear, Teri, is what I would say is budgeting paralysis as a result of choice points that folks have. And so as you know, having lived this for a number of years, and you and I being in the industry for a number of years, the paralysis is even greater because the choice points that all of us have in terms of what I would say is 2 distinct modes, which is continuing to invest in Band-Aid, if you will, legacy architecture that have served government constituents well, and then moving to a more digital native approach, if you will, with regards to how do you do that and how do you make decisions, right, particularly based upon the fact in terms of acceleration of AI that represent investments not only long-term, but likely knowing that whatever choice points that you make are going to be baked into your environment for 5, 10 years, maybe even longer down the road. And so what I would say is that budgeting paralysis is omnipresent. It probably doesn't just apply to IT, right? It may apply to transportation and everything else that we might talk about. Well, what I would say is industry, I think, is best prepared to have honest conversations to allow you to make a well-informed decision. Not only that, but given that a lot of our listeners are reporting up to a governor, in a lot of cases, how can this represent the best possible ROI for taxpayer dollars, right? And so that's a long way of saying that there are a lot of emerging tools, particularly as workforces return to the office, and how we might take advantage of that. Do we have the space? Do we have the IT? In a lot of cases, as importantly, you have IT infrastructure that is almost all pre-COVID, right? That hasn't evolved from there. And so you think about the tax on Wi-Fi, the tax on your network, particularly in this type of video format, can be fairly challenging. So how do organizations help you go do that?
The thing I love about that conversation, Todd, is that sort of this bringing together a different way of thinking about legacy modernization, because we've got to think about it not just replacing what we have, but taking it to the next level, but then also how that can help with the efficiency efforts if you bring in the investment. So it's kind of a 3-pronged way that governments really are going to have to rethink their overall strategies.
Well, and there's emerging tools. I call it the digital canary tools, if I could. And that may be an unusual statement, but if we think about that for a moment, it used to be when we thought about IT, it was either working or not working. In a lot of cases, we didn't a lot of times understand real time why it was not working, or what we might do for mitigation. And then, as importantly, we're discovering a lot of what I would say is government customers are falling into a couple different buckets, right? Which is half of them call IT, leave the call with IT and say they didn't solve my issue, right? The other half spend a tremendous amount of time doing it by themselves, right? So you have productivity losses, and you might open yourself to security considerations when your workforce or your colleagues are trying to do it on their own. So these digital canary tools, if you will, that are out in the marketplace allow you to do inspection and remediation I would say inspection, diagnosis, and remediation digitally, virtually, remote, whether you have a hybrid-based employee or someone that might be sitting in a government office. And so that's what I would say for those CIOs and those IT leaders that investigate what I would say is how they might have near-term investment that might be somewhat different from legacy investment to what the outcomes could be, can be fairly dramatic. And why that's going to be even more important is the tax, if you will, on AI workloads, on infrastructure, is only going to accelerate as we become more digitally native. And I think about my workload, my workday, if you will, Teri, is I use Copilot as an example probably every hour, right? It's become and as that proliferates throughout other organizations, it's pretty exciting, but it really, if you think about your past roles, it's a real game changer in terms of how do you support that.
So as you're thinking about that, Todd, you mentioned just the IT leaders. I love that concept, and I want to bring it out in terms of you got to think about what are the immediate actions that you're taking, but you also have to think of that in a different context of what long-term looks like. It's not a 4-year replacement cycle of just kind of turning over maybe the same model of equipment or the same approach to the way that you're looking at that technology. I think you have to have that long-term capability, but it has to prove that it's also going to be efficient from an ROI perspective.
Well, and the other probably, this has been around for a long time, but you think about telemetry and you think about the power of telemetry, and now it's becoming more pervasive in terms of, Teri, I might be able to help you and say, given that we spend most of us spend about 90% of our day on a digital device, whether it's our phone.
That is actually very true.
Or a laptop, 90% of our day. You think about our cars that we drive in, right? They're all now digitally native devices in terms of how they operate. So how do we take that telemetry, if you will, and then use it to make very educated decisions? A simple one might be the notebook, Teri, that you're using. You might have a certain characteristic of the composition of that device. And I may tell you, Teri, you know what? I can save you whatever, X amount of dollars because you don't need the power and performance of the device that you're purchasing. Or I may tell you, Teri, you're a power user. You're using AI development tools. And because of that, you're not nearly as efficient. So it can give you all that kind of basis. Or we talked about previously, what does our software licensing look like? Are we taking advantage of that? So there's so much out there, and it's so exciting. When I think about when I got into this business, I worked on an IBM XT with 2 floppy drives, right? And I thought it was a game changer in terms of when I was in college to where it is today. And so for all of us, it's exciting. But it also represents risk, and industry can really help you mitigate that out there. And what I would say is companies that have been around for a long time that have that legacy to understand that, and then emerging technologies. Both of those can be really powerful to make you and your constituents very successful.
Totally. And I really like that concept that you're talking about, Todd, in terms of the telemetry. because we have tended to think one size fits all, because in many cases, that was the fastest, if you will, quite honestly, and quote, the easiest to procure, to deploy, and to support. But now I think you're absolutely right. Given the distinctions in compute power, given what we have in terms of variety of devices, we really do need to think more specifically. And then all of that fits into an efficiency conversation, both from a cost perspective, from a power perspective. But I'm not sure that all of us CIOs are necessarily ready to be able to get to that level of granularity.
But I think your IT supervisory group, if you will embrace this in a way that makes them, let me say it really bluntly, which is your ability to do more with less. It's available today, and I think that resonates in terms of challenges with tax receipts and others in terms of efficiency. And then, as importantly, as the population ages and new generations come in that are digitally native, there's an expectation that we will deploy this. And so from a hiring perspective, from a support perspective, we need to embrace that emerging approach.
Well, Todd, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I think we've hit on everything from remote work to efficiency to technology. Well, I want to say thank you to listening to GovTech Viewpoints. Be sure to subscribe to the series on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Spotify so you'll never miss an episode. Join us next time as Todd and I explore the next big question. All right, it's great to see everyone, and we'll see everyone on our next episode. Thanks so much, Todd. And we'll see you soon.
Bye now.